Crime remains a stubborn and unrelenting crisis in South Africa. Gratuitous crime against women and children has seeped into the crevices of our homes and communities in ways that makes the fight against crime seem insurmountable. Recent disturbing cases include that of a 4-year-old girl from Eldorado Park whose father is charged with her murder. She was laid to rest on the weekend. In another incident, a shocking video of a mother encouraging her 4-year-old to consume an illicit substance has ignited outrage in Johannesburg's Newclare community. In KwaZulu-Natal, a Durban mother is facing charges for strangling and killing her 2 children in July. And another Durban mother who killed her toddler daughter was sentenced to an effective 20 years in jail 3 years ago. The 35-year-old woman pleaded guilty in the Durban High Court case. These are just a few cases that may seem anecdotal, but has become ubiquitous in South Africa. All this has left society wondering what has gone wrong. In our Crime Focus tonight, we speak to Celeste Lowe, a passionate advocate and survivor of child abuse and domestic violence, whose personal journey drives a commitment to supporting others on their paths to healing. Also with us is social justice activist Fina Kgodisang, as well as social worker John Clark, and the executive director of the Teddy Bear Foundation, Dr. Shahida Omar. Thank you so much for your time this evening. Really do appreciate you joining us. This is a really, really important conversation. I want to start with you, Celeste. Perhaps from the perspective of someone who's experienced the inhumanity of abuse as a survivor whose work is now informed by that experience. Tell us about what you think the failure of society is when it comes to the protection of vulnerable peoples from abuse we know is likely to visit them.
I think the main thing for me is that we don't do something when we see something. So I think people see things and they see the red flags and they notice that something is wrong, but then they just keep quiet about it. And I think from my own experience speaking to family members and extended family after the fact later in the years, they knew something was wrong, but we couldn't quite tell what it was. So I think a lot of the time we have people who are watching things happen and just going, well, it's not my business.
My goodness. Perhaps to bring you in, James, as a social worker, is that a reflection of where our hearts and minds collectively are?
Yeah, I mean, people need to know that there's a safe space that they can go to and not judge themselves for in any way seemingly betraying and or letting down anybody. I mean, human beings are wired for altruism and connection, and our natural conservative instinct is to conserve that. And so when something happens that's disturbing, we will tend to suppress it and push it down. And that's why we have social workers and professionals who give people the safe space. And the best thing to do is to catch it early, is for people to come before the situation becomes too conflictual and where people's defenses start getting too marshaled against the fear, and to try and break through that. It's a cultural systemic problem, it's a psychological problem, it's an emotional problem, and it's also an economic problem. All these things come together, so it makes it a hugely complex thing. And I think that's partly what paralyzes people. They just can't fathom the complexity of it all.
Yeah, given that it's such a complex confluence of different factors, psychosocial, economic, and otherwise, how then do we neatly find a way to describe where society finds itself? Because vulnerable people are vulnerable collectively, not just individually. And so when, Celeste says there's a collective action problem, we're not doing something when we see a problem, can we expect of vulnerable people to do something, John, when they see other vulnerable people being in danger?
Well, that's why you need somebody who has the trust, a level of trust from people that they can go to. And I think social media is to some extent to blame for the fact that we are so it tends to be so abused that people don't want to reach out. They just want to stay in their own private little worlds and to withdraw from society against our better, deeper instinct, which is to connect. So there's a question. There's a toxicity in our social media, which I think is a deterrent thing, and it's become a bit of a culture. And I just was thinking of reading a book at the moment where they remind me of something Peter Drucker said: "Culture eats strategy for breakfast." The culture is an enduring thing that actually carries forward, and somehow the change process requires that we transcend the cultural bias or the cultural, it's like the boiled frog syndrome. You know that thing about we're not aware that the frog's not aware that the water's getting hotter if it slowly increases. So there's a question of how do we sensitize our society, and that's through people, through social networks, through building trust, through non-judgmentalism, which is a primary social worker thing, to give people the space to actually be who they are and to seek to kind of bring forth and to encourage the deeper truth or the deeper sense of their humanity. And allow that to manifest.
Dr. Ouma, I want to bring you in here. What is the solution to the collective action problem?
Well, I think as was highlighted by the two previous people around the collective action is, we have to look at the systemic lens here. And I think if we look at our resources, our systems, the very systems that are supposed to protect our children, violence against women, unfortunately, those systems are not functioning effectively, and we cannot blame individuals in that structure. The lack of capacitation, the lack of skills, the lack of expertise, the lack of resources, access to resources, and I think those are challenges that are failing our community. So in order for things to happen, or we say spot it and stop it. So even when vulnerable people are reaching out to other vulnerable people, looking out for those safe spaces, unfortunately, sometimes because of the lack of all the different things, the challenges that I've spoken to, the responses that are elicited are not appropriate, are not adequate, are not timeless. And I think that is something that we have to address, because it's we need a whole of society approach. It's civil society organizations, it's your faith-based organizations, it's your community-based organizations, it's the neighbors, it's the schools, it's the recreation centers, it's your ECD facilities, it's everybody out there. And if everybody out there spots it and makes, breaks that silence, we're going to find that it's going to be a strong deterrent where it's going to prevent perpetrators and potential perpetrators from perpetuating the cycle of violence.
I want to bring you into the conversation here. There's a rural community in rural India where a group of women who collectively call themselves the Gulabi Gang would put on pink saris and they would go to the home of a perpetrator, and they would quite literally take the law into their own hands because the criminal justice system has failed them, and they would, through a very clear vigilante mob justice style, beat the perpetrator to a pulp, but only after having satisfied themselves with the facts that this is indeed a perpetrator. So it's not at random, certainly not arbitrary and willy-nilly. Is that what a modern day collective action solution looks like, where the community says, we've had enough, we will stand up, and where we have been failed by the system, and whatever we mean by the system, that we will correct that vacuum and we will bring about justice, not just as something that a victim deserves, but also justice as a deterrent to this continuing to happening in society. Is that perhaps, Fina, how a collective action solution can look like?
I wouldn't recommend violence.
Let's try that again. Can you just start there again for me?
I was saying I wouldn't recommend that we perpetuate violence to stop violence, because then we'll have anarchy, right? We'll have a society that is never, thriving and at peace, because how many more of these cases are you going to solve in that way? We need to enforce policies that are there, because we have ratified all these instruments. It means we are saying we are holding ourselves accountable to what those instruments are saying. I think what we don't do enough of is litigating against our government departments for not doing their part, right? And we need to really start litigating against, ministers, against executive directors for failing to uphold what the country has ratified as law. That's for me, the only way you can deal with it without necessarily introducing violence as a solution to violence.
Fascinating. Do you think when ministers are put in a position, not just ministers, office bearers across the board, really, across the state apparatus, in a position where the result of their culpability in the failure of delivering or implementing a policy fully affects them personally, that they would be more likely to act decisively, and that would bring about the political will that John earlier said we might be part of the confluence of issues that we lack?
I believe so. You see, in our organization, we have something called 360 evaluation, right? You are evaluated across board. And I think we need to introduce that with public officers, because who's and saying they are doing their good job? We are the ones who are recipients of their service or failed by them. So there must be a platform where we are allowed, in the same way they want us to vote them in, we should be able to be given a platform to do their performance review, so that we are the ones who say this one must not stay because they have failed. I think that power must be given back to people. That's the only way we can take that power without violence, using the very same instruments and systems. We can actually, if we are given power, and maybe it's something, Shahida, we need to advocate for, to say we must, in the same way we put them in office, have a say as to whether they continue serving and getting paid through our taxes, or we remove them for not upholding, their bare minimum duties.
Celeste, earlier on, you had said that part of the problem in society is that we see something happen and we do nothing about it. And oftentimes, someone who's vulnerable and in danger may not appear as conspicuously as we would ordinarily appreciate it to be the case, right? And in an instance where it is not exactly clear that this person is suffering from abuse, but there are indicators and signs that they may be a victim of abuse, particularly when we talk about children who are condemned into silence and who are threatened into silence. What is it as a society that we can do in such an instance?
Well, I think, because our work, we have a helpline, so not a helpline. So what we encourage people to do is, if you suspect that there's something going on, let us know anyway. Because rather err on the side of protecting someone and saving someone's life than err on the side of somebody dying or somebody being seriously injured. And there are remedies in the law if the law was just applied properly. And I think one of the reasons we're having so many problems is most people don't know what their rights are and don't know how to enforce their rights that are given to them by an amazing constitution and an amazing set of legislation.
But John, perhaps to ask this, do we have enough data points to indicate to us proactively who might be most vulnerable, and then proactively do something about protecting those who might be most vulnerable? Can we have leading signs of who might be the most vulnerable to abuse and sexual violence?
Well, we do. And I mean, it's interesting is I used AI, artificial intelligence, to try and educate myself a bit more about what was going on. And I was impressed with how quickly I was able to get some really useful information of the complexity of the situation. At the same time, the most important thing that I've learned from my 40 years as a social worker is that there's a saying which says it's common to oppose a truth, but impossible to resist a story. And that's why I'm just so interested in hearing more about Celeste's story, because as a social worker, all I do is help people learn from each other and connect them up so that they can be mutually empowering in terms of the extraordinary narrative that seems to reside in every human being, this capacity for transcendence, for somehow rising up against out of the most terrible situations And for those stories to be filtered through and then start using social media constructively to do that. I mean, I have a YouTube channel where I mainly work with whistleblowers. I'm using their stories as a way of them mutually supporting each other. And there's a similarity in that sort of field of practice to what we're doing now. We need people to be, and I don't like the word whistleblowers, prefer the term witness bearers. If you are bearing witness to something, tell somebody, share it, document it, and put it together in some sort of narrative story that we can begin to actually share that, because other people will hear that, they will respond to it, they will find their own inner strength to share their own story, and that's how transformation happens. I've come to a little bit, hopefully not too cynical, but a little bit skeptical about what can come from the top down. What can come, we need policy, we need resources, we need an economy that thrives, but at the end of the day, human beings are going to have to knit together in their own localized context within their families and community situations and found mutual solidarity for mutual empowerment so that they can actually assert their sense of agency, their sense of being the protagonists of their own story rather than waiting for somebody else to kind of take their story for them and make them famous.
Yeah.
That's not the way it works. It works with one story at a time.
Yeah. Finn, I want to bring you back in. Celeste problematizes the crisis as being a situation where in a country like South Africa, where we have great policies, great laws, but not too many people know their rights and therefore don't often access and seek the justice that they deserve and are due. As a social justice activist, do you find that to be commonplace in particularly vulnerable, impoverished communities where people just don't know how to access the justice that they deserve?
I wouldn't say there's no information out there. In fact, even in schools, through the CSE curriculum, LOE, these are things that are taught. I think as societies, we are so complacent. We react a lot, we are never proactive and preventative in our approach, right? So until something happens to you, you sort of turn a blind eye. It only becomes an issue when it's closer to home. And that we've seen a lot with people who, now that it's happening to you, you want information. But when information is given, because I know we do a lot of programs in communities, I know Teddy Bear also is implementing in communities, and we might not reach everyone, right? We also must not act as if we are able to reach everybody. But I'm saying even where information has reached people, you see how people act with ignorance until something has happened, then they react. So we need to cultivate this culture of being preventative in our approach. And it starts with also continuously having these conversations, talking about these issues in our homes, right? Not only when we see something happening, we want to react. But if we normalize talking about these issues, creating that environment, even in our spaces.
How do we do that, Fina? How do we normalize the abuse conversation in our homes, in our churches, in our schools, in our families? How do we do that?
We start with, when we see our children behaving in a certain way, we need to also pick up the signs and have conversations with them to say, I see something has shifted, what has happened, right? Because sometimes they wouldn't come. But you have children who are proactive, who will come and tell you something has happened, and many parents don't believe them. They accuse them of lying, they are naughty, they are all these things. So normalizing it means removing the barriers and acting within the home in a space where sitting down together, conversations are happening. When you see something on TV that portrays violence, you talk to your children about it. Do you see that? Do you think it's right? Do you agree with it? All those things can happen in the home.
Can I just pause you there? Sheila, I want to bring you back in. Is it the case that we infantilize children so much that we don't believe them when they share with us that they're victims of abuse, bullying, and or related acts, particularly around agency? Should we collectively as parents and as communities give children more agency?
Indeed, you've hit the nail on the head. We certainly need to give children more agency. We need to be talking like Sis Fina said earlier on, about consistent engagement and dialogue with children. We need to start talking to our children when they are just starting to develop vocabulary. They need to understand acceptable and unacceptable behaviors. But opening a platform of this kind of dialogue, one is giving the child and children permission that it's okay to talk about this, and it's okay, I will believe you. So already allowing that child, giving leverage to the child, that is part of that agency, the rights that children are afforded and informed about, that they will be supported regardless of whom or how and under whatever circumstances. And that is what children need more consistently, daily, regularly, from all sectors, not just from the home environment, but even within your ECD facilities, within the schools, because many times we've seen, even within the residential care facilities, where children are institutionalized and children have raised concerns and they've been silenced by saying, that's a philanthropist, that person contributes and makes such huge donations. So what does it do? It silences not only that child, it silences that whole community within that institution. And children, even within a school, when an educator has violated a child or an adult within that school community has abused a child, and the child's responses are not addressed appropriately, where the child's responses are dismissed or disregarded, it deters other children. And this is where we need to look at agency, giving children back that sense of power and control. And who better than the systems that are surrounding the child, the systems that the child is nested in. We need to look at that at a micro, meso, and macro level. At a micro level, where it's all the people that we've identified in society, and then at the macro level, looking at policy and legislation where children's rights are violated against the Constitution. That is when we need to stand up, speak out, and hold officers and officials accountable. And programs that are working, we need to amplify that. Where things are not working, we need to accelerate it. And I think this is where agency comes into being. On different platforms, we need to provide that opportunity to enable and empower children to break the silence and speak out.
I'm going to have to leave it there. Dr. Shaheeda Omar, thank you so much for your insights. Always fantastic speaking to you. You're an incredible interlocutor. Celeste Lowe, thank you so much for sharing your story and your experience with us. Your insights has been incredibly valuable. Fina, thank you so much for your work in our communities. I do think we need more of it, and I think your presence on this program tonight may just have spurred more of us on to roll up our sleeves and get the work done. John Clark, thank you so much for the clarity with which you helped us understand dynamics beyond just what the eye means. It's really been fantastic speaking to you all. Well, we're going to take a short break here on the late edition. We'll continue on the other side of this. Your weather will be up shortly.